What's up, guys? Welcome back to the infamous project. It is a special off-site video today because, well, I'm not even in my own apparel. Instead, we are at Red Dawgs Custom Paint, and I'm sure you guys will figure it out because I'm a little bit of a red dog myself, although there's a little bit of grays coming through there. But you're gonna see behind me well, if you even recognize it, but this is actually the twin turbo Coyote notch. And my man Brandon here, who I'm gonna bring into the video so you guys can meet him, we're gonna go over some of the stuff that he's done to this car. And I haven't seen it in, what, about a month and a little bit now? Yeah. He picked the car up and this is my first update. So you guys get to see exactly what I get to see for the first time. And I'll be able to point out a couple of the things that were corrected before he got the car. And then I'm sure he's gonna be able to point out some of the stuff that he's corrected since. And from what I can sort of see in the corner of my eye, I think he's already got some finished work sitting over off to the side here. I could be wrong. Are those touched?
Yeah.
Okay, they're done. So we got a sample. So we're gonna see what's going on. So here he is, Mr. Brandon.
What's up, guys? I'm Brandon, owner, operator, single solo, Red Dawgs Custom Paint. So what I ended up doing, I started on tearing it down, disassembling everything the best that I could, my ability. Also started to guide code it. I have a hood over here, which is a hood on the Foxbody. What the black is a guide coat. So what I'm essentially doing is blocking the existing material, find all my low spots, all my imperfections, and then address them from there.
So I know there's a lot of controversy over this because some people would argue you got to take it down to metal.
Yep.
And you got to start fresh versus this car that was an okay paint job.
Yeah.
Right? And we sort of had an idea of what the bones were like underneath.
Yes.
And this is more of a guide and block in using this as a base to be able to achieve this show quality finish that you're going to come up with. So what's your take on this going down to metal versus doing what you're doing here?
It's cost effective. If somebody's running around and they say they only have X amount of dollars to spend on a paint job, then you can work with their budget and give them kind of something what they want. You find, like what I'm doing here, you find all the major issues and you correct those. If I end up sanding through the paint and I find that it's peeling, then I'm gonna go forward and correct that even more. Kind of almost like polishing. You wanna go with the least aggressive method first because you don't wanna be so invasive on the actual car itself. Because even though you take it to bare metal, it could be the right, like, textbook, everybody prefers doing it in restoration, off-frame restorations. Well, you could also run into issues down the road. If it sits too long in bare metal, it could end up having surface rust come about. And even if you go to sand it off and address it, you may end up having rust bubbles come up over time.
Well, I think we have an example, right? Like we could probably go to that pillar. Yeah. And then we could say that and take a look here because this is the classic example, you know, up in here where we knew there was a little bit of bubbles and some correction that had to be done. And I think there was tons of filler hanging out in here or something was weird here with the trim. So what ended up happening or what did you find?
So right there was basically they didn't smooth out the lead. So being that this is a one-piece section, when they go to replace these roofs, back in the 90s, 80s, they used lead and then brazing as well for some cars. And even in some European applications like Volkswagen, they do a lot of laser welds and it's seamless. So what they do here is they weld it and then they come back with lead, heat it up, and then they smooth it out. What I ended up doing was grinding all of that off, getting to the part where there was fresh metal, and instead of using lead, I use a more corrosion protection application, which is a seam sealer, a 2-part seam sealer that goes over bare metal.
Perfect. You know, man, that looks good. Is there anything else that I guess that you found or that we weren't aware of? I know that you did some work down in here because, you know, although the car seemed pretty together and pretty straight, there is a question. I know the driver's side door has been changed, and although the Carfax is clean, you know, did you find any overall panel replacement, or do you think this was changed or it just kind of separated?
One thing that I ended up finding, me and a buddy that helps me do some of the structural repairs, we ended up finding out that this was more than likely in a rear end hit, and there was more extensive damage in this area. So this panel, as you can see, the quarter, there's seam sealer here, there is a overlap from the quarter onto the rear body, and all of that up in here was separated. Somebody previously ended up doing not too good of work, and so what we had to do is end up pulling and correcting and straightening the quarter to get this to fit properly in here. We ended up doing a little bit of finish work and put some seam sealer like OEM finish on it.
Very nice. I guess the $1 million question is, like, everybody wants a straight car, and I guess my biggest thing about it, even though that this car was white, now white hides a lot. White and yellow, you know, you can
get away with a lot.
Yeah, you can get away with a lot. It's not like painting black. If I had told him I wanted this car black, he probably would have turned the job down, because this car did show waves being a white car. And a lot on the tops of the fenders, probably people leaning over when they were doing the Coyote swap or God knows whatever else they were doing. So try not to lean, especially with your elbows on your body panels, guys. But the biggest thing for Foxbody for me personally is this body line right here that goes all the way down the side of the car. And a lot of guys, they'll just take the DA and, you know, orbital sander, and they'll just end up, I guess, what's the word, like taking away from that line, and things end up rounded, right?
Yeah, they don't sharpen it.
Yeah, so in this case, this looks prepped out pretty good, but is there still, I guess, a guide coat with the black and a final block, or has that been done?
So this has actually, in this area, there was also some filler work. There was a lot of filler here, and then also on the other side, which would also explain why the lead work in the run channels was so rough.
Right.
So
this looks nice and crisp, though, I gotta say.
Yes, we primed. I corrected the filler work here. There were some low spots here. Corrected all of that. Primed this section. There really wasn't a lot going on the quarter, but to ensure a more straight finish, we ended up priming the whole quarter again with a high build primer. Same thing with the fenders. Same thing with that quarter. The entire car has essentially been blocked and primed twice.
Right, and that old paint was almost the first high build primer.
Pretty much.
In reality, because you're using that material, and you got to remember, guys, when you're painting a car continuously, it's adding more and more material. And I think I talked about it when I was doing the door defender alignment video, because all of these seams, and you know, some painters with their techniques, or inexperienced painters, if they keep stopping on their panels on the seams, what happens, correct me if I'm wrong when I'm saying any of this stuff, you end up building up material on these edges, and they'll actually, you know, it'll almost look like, I don't know, sap or something, you know what I mean? It's almost like it's a run, but it's not. It just builds up on these seams, and then what happens is, especially on the front, if your car isn't subframe connected and it's just sitting on that wrong angle, you open your door, then all of a sudden you start chipping your paint between your fender and your door, because you got too much material. So by Brandon block sanding out what was originally there, took away a lot of that material. And I can see, and I just finally noticed it, he took away that antenna. And if you guys remember, there was a bunch of, there was something they did there. I don't know.
They tried to do a basically that flush mount that you had on there. They essentially tried to cover up the mounting holes and then just put that blocking plate on there. So what we ended up doing was cutting a diameter that fit in the hole of the antenna, and then welded it up. And then on the back side, I'm going to go through and do corrosion protection on the back to protect everything from there.
So that's a very important point, and I learned this from my painter Boogie up in Toronto, because I was a guy who always shaved his door handles, always shaved the locks, and did all that stuff. And this goes to all you guys who shave your engine bays, and you're welding all that metal in your engine bay, especially over that frame rail area that is notorious to rust. And if you don't have that metal prepped on the backside, because yeah, you're going to prime it once you weld it in and in place, and yeah, it looks great here, but what about the underside if that is unfinished? And I guess you would spray like almost what would it be, like a weld through primer?
Yeah.
On it, so that way you're protecting that metal as much as possible. And you want to try and that's sort of where even the factory has flaws, because that's why some of these door jambs rot out. That's why some of the frame rails, because the factory couldn't even get the epoxies or the primers and the paints in those areas. So without ado, I really want to look at these doors over here, because they're looking pretty nice, man.
So this is the first clear coat session. I need to sand it smooth and do a flow coat on it. I don't typically, I don't prefer to cut and buff. The reason being is, yes, you can get a really good finish. There's guys that sit there and say, I want 8 coats of clear coat on it so I can protect it and it won't scratch and everything like that. What you end up being subject to is chemical reactions, solvent pop, dieback, pinch back. Dieback and solvent pop is the real 2 big contenders when you start layering on clears. You can essentially do it. I don't prefer doing it. Probably the max is like 4 coats, cut it completely flat, and then flow coat it. The reason why I prefer doing that is if you cut that top layer of the clear off, it will never shine again. Right. Even though you polish it to a slick, smooth shine, over time, it starts degrading. It starts filling.
It almost looks hazy.
Yes, it starts oxidizing over a long period of time. And especially here in Texas, white, fortunately, not so much, because it reflects. If it was black, you would see it probably within the first year.
So this final top coat that you put on, because even this is pretty nice. Like, there's a bit of peel. I'd almost say this is a factory. A factory peel in most cases, which, if you're going for a factory look, everything is good. But that final flow coat that you're going to put on, is that, I'm assuming you reduce the clear down enough where you almost are going to make it drip, but you don't? Or how does it work when you're just doing that final flow coat?
Everybody has their own method.
You don't have to share all your secrets.
I really don't care. I mean, honestly, it's basically to each is their own. You have your own method of doing something, I have my method. So what I typically do is I stay within the guidelines of the paint manufacturers. This clear is a medium solid clear. Just to protect it, I put 3 coats on this one. What I'm going to end up doing is going over the top of this after this is cured for a couple days. I'm going to end up using a more like high solids glamour clear. Something a little bit more like stays wet longer, flows out, smooths out. And what I will also do is lay these flat, because I've already painted the inside of the jams. Right. We're not going to flow coat the underside of the jams. The jams are going to be good enough. Yeah.
And then by having it down, you can get more on without the fear of it running on you.
Yes. Yeah. You can really lay it out, flow it out, and
So in reality, like, and we could talk, I'm sure we could have a whole other episode in terms of just the conditions of paint. When we talk about humidity, we talk about temperature, we talk about gun pressure, all of those different things, which especially here in Texas, where we're seeing this 80 degrees in the morning and 30 degrees at night, which is
random.
It's unacceptable. I left Canada for a reason. But how would you handle metallics? Because, unless you had the car on a rotisserie, and you want to get that flow coat per se, or if you were doing I guess it wouldn't matter because you're really just doing a flow coat on top, but is there anything that you would have to keep in mind in terms of the way, the direction that you're spraying things? Like, would it have any potential impacts?
Oh, absolutely. So essentially what a fan pattern is, here, I have some paint guns back here. So this is your typical automotive paint gun. This is a Sodajet 4000B HVLP with a 1.2.
High volume, low pressure.
Yes. There are also RPs, which are pretty much like almost conventional back in the day, but they're reduced pressure. That's what they're essentially called.
Like, is there a time and a place for, I guess, a high pressure application?
Yes.
Or is everything, because everything now, everyone's like HVLP.
Yes. So if you were doing like large surface areas like airplanes, 18-wheelers, buses, anything that's more industrial like, you're going to use a pressure pot where you pressurize a pot and it's super high pressure and it blows wide fan pattern, so you don't have to be in there, because this fan pattern is essentially only about like 6 inches.
Right.
And it comes out from a triangle like. So back to the question with the metallics. If I was on a hood like this and I rock too far back this way and the triangle is like this, what's going to end up happening is you're going to build more material here than here. You want to try to have it as flat and parallel as possible.
Right. So you would have to, based on the angle that you're on, you got to adjust what you're doing. Otherwise, that metallic might be sitting sideways. Because I actually had a hood once that was painted off the car. And when you looked at the fender this way, so that the fender actually looked lighter, the hood looked darker. And then if I turned around this way, it was the opposite. It flip-flopped because it was almost like the metallics laid down opposite.
Yeah. So like in today's automotive collision industry and restoration, a lot of people are starting to refer to EPA regulations, things like that, and Waterborne is the more prominent right now. And
do you want to talk about that?
Why not? I mean, why not?
I guess we got to talk about it, right? Like,
I mean, so back to what
because I want to argue, like, I feel like paint isn't the way that they used to make it. You know what I mean?
No.
Like, in terms of, and everybody now is 3M wrapping the front, or they're vinyl wrapping their cars, or we got ceramics, and we have all these things that are protecting. Because even my wild strawberry car, it's as beautiful as it looks, the whole front end, it's all stone chips.
Yeah.
Or, like, and how do you get around it with some of these new paint?
So to what you were describing earlier with the hoods in that aspect, solvent-borne, that was real susceptible to humidity, temperature, air pressure, things like that, like you had already established. Well, in that case, what could have ended up happening is they painted the hood off. Right. And painted it at a certain angle. And with solvent, it was real susceptible. If it wasn't laying the exact way as that adjacent panel, it was going to show a slight difference. So what paint manufacturers have come up with and formulated is, one, also with EPA regulations and environmentally friendly materials, Waterborne. And Waterborne, I mean, 98% of the world is we are majority of water. Right. One, that's unhealthy for us.
So is beer.
Huh, yeah. And liquor. To a certain degree. Anyway, so the water is not as susceptible to what was just previously described. Water is also more user-friendly. The material that I use on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, which is my day job, this is side, it asks you to do a heavy wet coat, almost try to achieve coverage on the first coat, right, and then a dust orientation coat, where you just finalize the coverage and then even out the metallics, which goes back into blotchiness or striping. You can almost hide a lot more with water. Another thing, some people will say, well, water's too thin, it doesn't cover, things like that. Well, paint manufacturers have come up with gray shades, and or the manufacturer that I use is Spieshecker or what is it, Exalta. And they use gray undercoats, primers and sealers. Axo Noble, Sickens Autowave, I think Lesinol, which is a sister company of Axo, they also have colored primers, which will help achieve.
So it's almost like the
House of Colors.
House of Colors. Yeah, I was just going to say, it's almost like catching up to the candy paints with all these tri-coats and all these things, because it all comes down to the base. And if you don't have the base right, then it's going to completely change what the output and the final coat's going to look like.
I mean, to that, what you just said, like in Axo, when I was spraying that, there was NAH paint code, Nissan Red, almost like a candy. And I literally used a green undercoat. People were like, why are you going to use green? Because it made it cover in one coat. Because if you look at the color wheel, essentially when you color tint, any color opposite of that color will kill that color.
Right.
So in return, being that it was a translucent color, immediately covered. Just
and you know
tricks.
What? And that would save so much money in the end, because somebody else might be trying to lay down 3 coats just to get that coverage.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that that's part of the importance of, you know, for anybody that's at home doing it yourself, which I've always been, you know, proud of being the DIY guy, but you learn some of these things the hard way, unfortunately. Like, especially if you were like, I guess maybe like gonna paint red on top of black, it'd probably be a tricky one. Like,
it would darken the red.
Yeah, and I remember a guy at the shop back up in Canada, and he was just adamant about all of these different things. So there's a science behind it. He went to trade school. He knows what he's talking about. He's not a backyard painter like myself that has to figure out the hard way. But anyways, you know, I think that's a really good introduction to Brandon and back to the Coyote car and some progress on it. We're hoping to get this completed in how long?
I'm probably looking at about another 2 weeks.
Another 2 weeks. So once we get it back, then I'll be making sure all the trim is right. There's gonna be a wheel and tire swap, and it's gonna be, you know, I gotta do my thing to the interior and get that all done. But make sure to follow along. I can put Mr. Brandon, AKA Red Dog, his contact information in here. We can keep him busy with Foxbody stuff. I know he's busy with a lot of other things, but if you guys are interested down here in Central Texas, and paint now, if you guys are not in Central Texas, I sincerely believe it is potentially worth you shipping your car if you're serious about getting your paint done properly. And I can attest to this. I have a car sitting in Ocala, Florida, with Spike's refinishing for the same reasons, because Spike knows Fox bodies, he knows what he's doing. So similarly, if any of you guys were interested, you could have myself making sure that all the right trim and the body lines and all of those things are taken care of, and you can have the master himself over here potentially paint the car for you. So there you have it, guys. Thank you for following along, subscribing, all those good things, and stay tuned to the Coyote twin turbo Fox notchback.